A lot of compelling arguments have been made against Trump's travel ban, that it is unconstitutional, cruel, stupid, counterproductive, and so on. But if you dig a little deeper, there's really one big underlying paranoia that enables any anti-Muslim proposal. That paranoia is the belief that Islam is a threat and that political correctness is keeping us from dealing with it. Now, this paranoia has spread wide because it is promoted by many different forces, from flat-out bigots to opportunists to otherwise thoughtful people who are just unable to examine their own biases. Without getting into every little complicated detail, I think this paranoia boils down to two myths. Myth number one, the claim that Islam is more violent than other religions. Now sure, there are verses that command the killing of men and women and children, and ones that say that enemies who make peace can be put to forced labor, and the ones that don't, you can kill the men and then plunder the women and children for yourselves. If these are the kinds of verses that concern you, you may be surprised to know they actually come from the Bible, not the Quran. In fact, even a contributor to Islamophobia like Sam Harris had this to say.
The Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is the ugliest, most theocratic, most barbaric of all these texts. Right? It's worse than the Quran, in my view.
Of course, Harris goes on to say that the doctrine of Islam is a bigger threat for other reasons, and that's a topic for a future video. But it cannot be argued that the scriptures in Islam are more violent than they are in other mainstream respected religions. You know, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are actually very similar. They all have mainstream believers who interpret scriptures peacefully, and they have a small fringe of extremists who interpret them violently. So when Jewish extremists stab participants at a gay pride parade, or burn Palestinian children, or shoot up a Montana bartender over a non-kosher drink, we don't say that we're at war with Judaism, and only bigots would claim that all Jews support murder. When Christian fanatics shoot up abortion clinics or kidnap thousands of children and turn them into child soldiers, we don't say that we're at war with Christianity, and only bigots would claim that all Christians support this. Yet because of terrorism by Muslim extremists, confused thinkers like Sam Harris say that we're at war with Islam, and lying bigots like Ayaan Hirsi Ali claims that all devout Muslims support terrorism. Hirsi Ali's rhetoric is not just vile, it is dangerous. Because when her lies are believed, it is not hard to see how innocent Muslims can be targeted with violence, as we just saw with the attack on the mosque in Quebec. Religious bigotry costs lives. Myth number two, the size of the threat from Muslim extremists justifies anti-Muslim measures. Trump's National Security Advisor, General Flynn, once tweeted that fear of Muslims is rational, and for supporting evidence, he linked to a YouTube video that just lists violent acts by Muslims.
The Air France and Entebbe hijackers were Muslims. The Iranian embassy takeover was by Muslims. The Beirut U.S. Embassy bombers were Muslims.
Now this goes on for a bit, and if you find this sort of thing convincing, you may want to consider the fact that tens of thousands of rapes and murders take place in the US every single year. If you selectively extract the murders committed by any one racial or ethnic or religious group from those stats and list them that way, you can pretty much make any group look like monsters. That's the same tactic used by Trump when he talks about graphic crimes committed by immigrants, when in fact immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than US-born citizens. Now, are certain kinds of terrorism more likely to be committed by Muslims than non-Muslims? Sure. But statistically speaking, mass shootings are more likely to be committed by white people, and robberies are more likely to be committed by black people, and you can pretty much do this with any group. But do you hear anyone suggesting that white people should be barred from owning guns? Or that black people should be subjected to extreme vetting before they're allowed into retail stores? Of course not. No sensible person would ever say such a thing because we know that complex societal factors contribute to certain crime demographics, and we do not stigmatize entire communities because of the crimes of the few. You know, there is no greater hypocrisy than when right-wingers are silent as white mass shooters shoot up Sandy Hook and Aurora and Charleston and Oak Creek and Seal Beach and just recently the mosque in Quebec. But when Muslim extremists do it in San Bernardino, they freak out and say, "Oh my God, we have to get rid of the Muslims." That is a bigoted double standard. An American is statistically more likely to be killed by a dog than by a Muslim terrorist. And if you're not willing to ban all dogs because some of them kill people, you should really examine your decency and humanity if you want to get rid of all Muslims because some of them might pose a threat. And a final word for those who claim to be concerned about free thinkers in Muslim societies. There are tons of progressive Muslims who oppose extremism and violence and the mistreatment of women. But when their fight for progress becomes associated with your blanket demonization of Islam, you undermine their ability to connect with ordinary Muslims to win this fight. So if you really want to support progressive Muslims, end your bigotry. Stop with the Islamophobia.